Hello, everyone. It's June 14th, Sunday, and right now there's a lot of conversation going on around police reform, and I just wanted to share a little bit of what I think are questions we should be considering. Please understand that I'm coming from a place today of feeling the need to learn a lot more about the conversation that's going on. I'm not an expert, and this is not a fully formed response on my part, but what I hope to do is clarify a little bit of vocabulary and talk briefly about values and questions that we could and should be asking based on the things that I have learned over the last several years, particularly around the Baltimore City Police Department. So first and foremost, over human history, most societies have felt it important to have people who were in the community with the purpose of, that's been summarized as, to protect and serve. And I'm going to just share some thoughts, but please understand that a lot of what I want to do is clarify vocabulary, not making political statements. So please, you may come from one of various partisan perspectives or nonpartisan perspectives, but vocabulary is an important thing, and sometimes people take one word to be associated with a political party. That's not what I'm trying to do. I just want to try to be helpful. So we are talking about the subject of having people in our communities whose job is to protect and serve, and that's our police. That's our current system. For me personally, I have seen enough humanity and interactions between humanity that I do think it's a good idea to have some people that are trained and ready and can help our community to serve our citizens every day, to protect our citizens. It does seem like a good idea in general. What we're seeing now is a lot of folks talking about abolishing the police. In our current society in the United States, I think that if that's a course of action that's going to be pursued, we should do that carefully. And I think that in particular, there are examples that are being used that I think are not being fully examined, like Camden, New Jersey. I think there's a lot more questions that I have right now than I have answers about what that looks like. So I have a lot of questions, but abolishing the police, just that thought, what I'm hearing from people is that that thought is a police department is corrupt to the point that we have to scrap it entirely and then replace it with some new form of policing. So I would have questions such as, how long is that expected to take? What would that look like in its new form? What's being talked about maybe more so is the idea of defunding the police or reducing the budget. And so let's just talk about that for a moment, because I think that's what more people are talking about. Every family has a certain amount of money that they take in every month and a certain amount of money that goes out every month. And some families think about it in terms of a budget, trying to think through, like, here's the predictable amount of money that comes in. How are we going to spend that money? And for us as a family, we do that around a values-based budget. What are the things that we value? Let's make sure that we're spending money on those things. And then as a Christian, what we try to do is set our budget so that we live on less money than's coming in every month, so that we can be generous, so that we can try to help other people. But in terms of civilization's budget and budget-related questions, my personal view is that it should be based on values. And what I do appreciate about the public conversation right now is that I do hear people calling for values-based budget decisions. I think that's a good thing. So I think we should be really careful about an emotional reaction to the word defunding, and we should try to think through examining what it means and then what our response should be. Here's a few things that I think, as it relates to police budget and reform, that are things that we should be learning about, where we should be asking questions, that we should be thinking about. I want to say very clearly, I am against police brutality. Because a police officer is a a sworn representative of the government who carries more than one weapon, when they have an interaction with the public, it's not an equal interaction. That's the nature of the interaction. And so for that police officer to have a value system that is focused on protecting the citizens and serving the citizens, that is essential. And I think where there has been some efforts in a good way for reform, it's focused on those values. So um, I think that I want to be very clear. I'm against brutality. I'm against, I don't ever want to have to know that an American citizen was killed the way that George Floyd was killed. I don't want to ever see that again. And I am also for reform. And I want to be clear with what I'm saying here. Reform is important for any big, important organization, because any big organization is going to have thousands of employees and is going to need a value system that's clear, that's helpful to the common good, and is going to need reform. It's going to need regular accountability and change, because any large organization is going to have a member of the organization, at least, that at some point in the organization's history goes rogue and does things that are ideal against the ideals of that organization. And you have to have systems in place for how you deal with people within the big organization that go rogue. So I just want to talk about a couple of those real briefly. One of the most important things for police reform and reform in any organization around these issues is your hiring practices. What do you do when you are hiring new personnel? And this is really important. So, for starters, I think good police reform has an eye on the hiring process. Is our hiring process designed to hire soldiers or police officers who have a value system on protecting and serving? And in my view, a good police reform would include the budget to be able to significantly include a mental health screening, personality screening, decision-making screening into the hiring process. Before a candidate is even hired, we need to know, are they prone to violence? Are they able to remain calm in a tense situation? Do they understand verbal de-escalation? So the training process, and obviously that requires money to be spent, and it requires a constant accountability. Is our hiring process working? Another aspect of that would be training. So you hire a new candidate, you bring them in, and then you train them on what the job is, how the job works, what your value system is, what your vision is. And maybe one of the most important things, and I don't hear a whole lot of folks commenting on this, and I did include these in my very first post about George Floyd, each of these systemic things that I'm going to talk about. So your hiring process and then your training process has to be specific. Are we hiring and training military personnel or police officers that should be engaged in their community, physically present in their community, building relationships in their community where they know the value system is to protect and to serve? And so that training, and I am a volunteer Baltimore City Police chaplain and have gone through initial training, which did include the Baltimore City Police Department's Shoot, Don't Shoot video simulator, and diversity training and a number of other trainings. How we train police officers has a lot to do with then how they're going to behave. But then what you have to also do, which you do in multiple professions, which I've had as a pastor today, and then in the past in multiple other jobs that I've had, includes retraining. What is your continued education system like? Does it help a person who now has been on the job for a couple of years and now has had some real world experience and maybe now is a lot more serious about learning than they were maybe with the initial training? Is your training system and then your continued education system training them along a value system of protecting and serving the citizens? Now, most importantly, this must include verbal de-escalation. I saw some funny jokes about on social media trying to bring a little bit of levity in the midst of these really intense conversations that we're having, that there are people who work at Waffle House that have more verbal de-escalation skills than some of the videos we're seeing of police officers. And you know, I kind of had to chuckle about that a little bit, but it's actually concerning and sad. And that's one of the things that I have tried to learn about for myself in my life, but then also that I've tried to help serve some of our Baltimore police officers with, and that is verbal de-escalation. When somebody is getting intense with you, how do you respond? When there is an emotionally charged, intense conversation, how do you respond? When someone is coming at you, how do you respond? And I've seen really bad behavior and I've seen really good behavior from police officers in that respect. But training and then continued education around verbal de escalation is really important so that they can be peace officers. So continued education and training. Now those things do cost money, and so whether we are going to scrap a police department entirely and start over, or if we're going to just reduce their budget, either way, for me personally, I think that there needs to be an appropriate amount of the budget, and I'm not an expert on this, but an appropriate amount of the budget that goes towards the hiring practice, the training, and then the continued education of those officers along those values. Now, in addition to that, what I would say is that you've got to have an accountability system. How do we handle it when a member of the organization goes rogue? What do we do? How does the accountability system work? Now, a lot can be said, both positive and negative, around body cameras, but I have myself seen police officers use body camera footage in a way that is helpful, that brings better honesty, more clear data to the reports that are filed, that makes the system, whether it be the internal affairs system or the justice system and how court cases are brought, it helps the system work better and more accurately. Not perfect, but it is a part of the system that does cost money that I think is also helpful for reform. Even if you're going to scrap a department and start all new, I do think that the body camera system is helpful. And I'm open to hearing anything that would be better, but it's helpful in your accountability system. But then beyond that, you also have to have employees, representatives, executives, mental health professionals, lawyers, and street ready officers that are in part of internal affairs or whatever you would call a accountability committee. You've got to have people that are going to review. You've got to have people that are civilian oversight, civilian people with a voice into. And since the death of Freddie Gray, I have been at a bunch of different community meetings, listening to community members and listening to police response around claims of brutality and going through and then bringing accountable. And I've been aware of how that accountability has then been brought to bear to try to improve the situation. And so it's really important. So what I would say is that we should be asking ourselves questions to help inform our voting, to help inform our public voice, regardless of where we fall on the issues. For me personally, I would say, how much of the budget and is it well spent around the issues of the hiring process, around the issues of training, around the issues of continued education, and around the issues of accountability? For me, that's what working towards a better tomorrow looks like. But listen, I don't have the answers for this. I'm not ever going to run for office. I don't get paid for any of this. I don't have any other agenda around it. Those are legitimately some of the questions that I am still learning about. But I wanted to try to bring some vocabulary too, because these are emotionally charged situations. And I think that we as a community are not well served by a emotional reaction when we hear from somebody a vocabulary word that we don't like, that we just cancel them and we don't ever interact with them. I think where we as a society can grow better to protect and serve all citizens is if we will listen, if in conversations and in dialogue, and if we will try to have an intent to improve our system. And I think every citizen can be involved with that. So this is just a starting point. I'm getting questions from folks. I mean, I would prefer to stay silent on this, but I just feel like it's really important for me to at least tell you a little bit of where my head's at right now. So I hope this is helpful to you. Let's continue the conversation. It's beautiful weather today. I do hope that you're able to enjoy your weekend. Thank you for watching this.